The number of cities with a population of over 300,000 people increased more than 5 times from the mid-50s of the last century to the beginning of the 2020. Today, 780 largest cities of the world account almost 60% of the world's economic activity. It is in the megacities where the most efficient use of all resources is achieved. At the same time, the world's largest cities are constantly facing key global development challenges, such as climate change, the growth of inequality and competition, consequences of technological progress, population aging, epidemiological challenges. In the last decade, there has been a reorientation of approaches and models of city management. The shifting of priorities is the result of the growing importance of the well-being of citizens. The priorities of cities are evolving from creating infrastructure to improving quality of life for everyone. Key factors for long-term sustainability of the megacity in the response to the global growing challenges are sustainable development, health, and well-being. The expiring year confirmed these priorities. Expenditure on maintaining health and well-being accounted for almost half of the global health expenditure. New trends in human-centered urban planning policy are health-oriented urban development, the urban health approach, management based on the principles of sustainable development. These trends form the image of a prosperous future, which is aimed at improving the quality of life and creating a comfortable and safe environment. What is the well-being of citizens, and what are the urban development aspects affecting it? How does human-centered city development meet sustainable development goals? What are the key health challenges facing the world's megacities today? And what kind of practices and governance mechanisms do cities use in response to these threats? Welcome to the plenary session, Megacities Against Global Challenges. How cities are changing their development paradigm. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm glad to see everyone, all those who joined us via some remote platforms, and it's a pity that we are not meeting offline, but we are used to that format, and what we're still lacking, still missing, is an informal conversation behind the scenes or on the sidelines of the forums. But on the stage, everything is as usual. The only difference is that our panelists will not be here in the studio except for Eugen, who managed to come to us, but most of the speakers would be using telecommunication means in order to express their views on a very sophisticated topic: how the cities are going to develop in the future. The video showed that there are very serious technological and biological trends which are reshaping our cities. First of all, thanks to the technologies and healthcare, we are living longer and longer, and this results in aging of the population, and therefore we have to build the health system anew. Secondly, and this is especially crucial for the emerging markets, the cities are more attractive for living. More and more economic factors display themselves in the cities, and there are more people living in the cities, more money actually are flowing into the cities, and therefore the level of stress is going up. This is due to the man-caused factors and technological factors, and very often giant cities make people feel lonely, although the population of the city is several million people. It is obvious that the urban policy and development policy can address these challenges and construe their work respectively. We today want to discuss how we have to anticipate and predict the changes of the future, how we have to react to the questions which arise. Today we have a very good panel of speakers. With us are Andrei Bochkarev, Moscow Deputy Mayor for Urban Planning Policy and Construction; Maimuna Moht-Sharif, Executive Director, UN Habitat, and Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations; Edward Glazer, the Fred and Eleanor Glimp Professor of Economics in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences of Harvard University. With us, representative of the healthcare industry, Niels Lund, Vice President, Novo Nordisk; Kristin Knudsen, Director of External Relations Strategy, Knowledge and Innovation, also from UN Habitat. Besides, on the stage, you may see Evgeny Kuznetsov. He has a very personal interest in healthcare, and besides, he's CEO of Orbita Capital Partners. This is a venture fund. And last but not least, Tigran Khudoverdian, the managing partner from Yandex. We'll start now discussing the questions which I've already highlighted, but still, I think that I would highlight three main vectors which are followed by the policy in terms of the urban development and management. First of all, this is the urban health policy. This is not the first time that at the Moscow Urban Forum we're discussing that. This is the policy aimed at the basic needs of people, and the basic need is about the health. Another basic need which has to be supported again, this is the well-being of the cities, and this is about the well-being of Muscovites, Moscow residents. And the third topic, the third priority, is how we treat the resources which we have in order to achieve the first two goals. This is the problem which is called sustainable development. How we can develop our economy, how we can address economic, political, and social problems or issues without necessarily destroying the resources base which we have to pass over to our next generations. We would kindly ask our speakers to focus on these three main areas, on these three main topics, so that we could understand how do we act in future. And first of all, I'd like to pass the floor to Maimuna Moht-Sharif. It would be a video address who will speak about the importance of sustainable development and interaction between the cities. Please watch the video address.
Excellencies, honorable panelists, distinguished guests, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to those of you in Moscow, and good morning or evening to the rest connecting from all around the world. I'm delighted to provide welcoming remarks to this plenary session on megacities versus global challenges, a new paradigm shift in urban development. Congratulations to the City of Moscow and the Moscow Urban Forum Secretariat for organizing this online conference on City for All, well-being, health, sustainability. The organizers could not have selected a more relevant topic as we stand together against the COVID-19 pandemic that is putting great pressure to all cities and communities worldwide. UN Habitat is proud to be a key partner in today's event. As the UN Focal Point Agency on Sustainable Urbanization and Human Settlements, UN Habitat is grateful to the City of Moscow for following up to the commitments made in the new urban agenda. I had the privilege to participate personally in the Moscow Urban Forum last year and saw several positive dynamic urban transformations being undertaken in Moscow. We look forward to coming together again, hopefully in person in Moscow for the next forum in 2021. Let me take this opportunity to thank Moscow and the Russian Federation for the very significant support during the 10th session of the World Urban Forum earlier this year in Abu Dhabi. UN Habitat's global partnership with Moscow Urban Forum and with the city of Moscow is within the framework of our long-standing partnership with the Russian Federation in addressing some of the most pressing sustainable urbanization challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, the importance of international cooperation, including that between cities, has never been greater. We all thought that the world would turn the corner and start reopening our economies, but it seems that we are in the prolonged health crisis. Examples of countries and territories successfully dealing with the pandemic are also clear and continue to inspire us every day. It is certainly possible to build back better, greener, and fairer from COVID-19. The new Urban Agenda and Sustainable Development Goal 11 places urbanization at the forefront of development policy, recognizing its critical role for overall sustainable development and prosperity. It has become commonly cited that the battle to achieve the SDGs will be won or lost in cities. How do we manage our urbanization will therefore largely impact how we recover from the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. Cities and local governments represent the green shoots of the recovery process. The Secretary General's policy brief on COVID-19 in an urban world highlights that we have an opportunity to reflect and reset how we live, interact, and rebuild our cities. I would like to highlight 5 important principles from the report to guide us build back better, greener, and create a city for all. First, we need to tackle all inequalities and development deficit in urban areas and between urban and rural areas. Second, we need to strengthen the capacities and resources of local governments to deliver on their development mandate. Third, we need to protect, guarantee, and boost public services. Fourth, we need to engage communities in the decision-making processes, specifically looking at full participations of women and girls. And fifth, we need to use the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs as the overarching framework for our response. The steps required for sustainable cities are laid out in Sustainable Development Goals 11 and other urban-related SDGs. The implementation of the new urban agenda set out the how. It is encouraging to see more and more cities recognizing the significance of localizing the SDGs at city level. By March 2021, member states are preparing their first national report on the implementation of the new urban agenda, which is now hosted on the Urban Agenda platform. The platform also provides us with a wealth of material on how cities are making progress. It is through partnership, advocacy, and exchange, such as this Moscow Urban Forum, we can effectively share progress made, lesson learned, and inspire the action we need to take for cities to become healthier, more sustainable, leave no one and no place behind. I wish all of you a stimulating and successful event. Thank you.
We thank Ms. Moksharif for such an emotional address. In essence, the topic of sustainable development is very relevant for all the world. This is an agenda of all the major economic communities and various institutions. Skolkovo today is hosting a conference dedicated to artificial intelligence for the sake of sustainable development, and this is important for the cities. Apart from the long-term goals such as sustainability and well-being of citizens in the long run, we now have a black swan which we have to react to. My next question would go to Mr. Bochkarev. Mr. Bochkarev, are you with us? Kirill, good afternoon. I can hear you very well. We can see you now. Mr. Boshkarov, as Moscow Deputy Mayor for Urban Planning Policy, you have always to be guided by long-term perspective. The projects which you implement into the city, the ones which you are planning for, these are the processes which we, as the city residents, we'll see in 3, 5, or 7 years to come. So it means that the project which was announced 7 years ago now actually materializes, comes true. But COVID-19 necessitated urgent measures necessary to save people's lives, necessitating addressing certain issues promptly, so in order to increase the hospital's capacity, saving up people's lives. How does the Moscow administration, how did Moscow administration react to COVID-19, this black swan, and how the urban planning and policy changed? Colleagues, good afternoon. Kirill, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you at the Moscow Urban Forum. You have asked a very important question. The matter is that certainly the situation of 2020 impacted the performance and implementation of the plans which Moscow and other cities put forward in terms of sustainable development and development of all its areas. COVID-19 certainly was not unnoticed by Moscow and drove major changes into our policies. The mayor of Moscow took extraordinary measures in order to minimize the consequences of the pandemic, which has a global nature. Early in the year, Moscow mobilized all its forces. My colleagues from the Social Protection and Healthcare Department probably are in the position to tell you more, because these are the people who are dealing with their healthcare, with doctors, healthcare workers. They have become the heroes of this battle. They're working day and night. But besides that, other services, including urban planning departments, were involved in drafting of response measures. For instance, apart from existing medical and healthcare centers, a decision was taken to somehow deploy temporary hospitals in case the wave of the pandemic increases the number of patients who would need hospitalization. Some of these hospitals were of temporary nature, needed to treat the patients not in so grave condition. And we also built a specialized infectious diseases hospital, which now is used for the most serious patients with the gravest conditions. It takes the area of 800,000 square meters, equipped with 25,000 pieces of medical equipment, and we did that within 24 days. This is a record. This is totally unheard of. That's true. In addition to that, we did a number of other steps to reset the work of municipal services and departments and divisions, but still the main objective was aimed at minimizing or mitigating the pandemic, and we progress a lot on that, so that the people who are ill, who are recovering, do not make us forget the long-term sustainability goals. Yes, I asked you about that hot burning topic because everyone actually is anxious about COVID-19, but we all realize that COVID-19 would be over, and next year the healthcare situation would be much better due to vaccination, and the long-term plans are still there on the table, and we have actually to move in three directions: sustainable development, healthcare, and urban planning. So please highlight these three issues. Despite the situation which impacts the cities and even countries, still in the city of Moscow, we are aimed at progressing on the programs which are put on the table, and we're doing everything possible that economy works, culture and sports evolve, and that the cities are convenient for people to live in. Sustainable development is provided not only by the decision-making, but we actually are providing health for the city, for the city residents, creating necessary living conditions, and certainly we meet the basic needs of the residents, not only in parts of where they live, but we cover other crucial and pivotal areas of life. In the last 10 years and in the years to come, we will continue this work. Let me say a couple of words about what we, the team, are doing in Moscow. The main areas or the main blocks we're working on, first of all, this is about the deployment of an accessible transportation network. Not always the city developed a balanced way. Lots of money actually has been invested into the development of the transportation network. Big attention is paid to the development of social infrastructure. And we focus on putting kindergartens and schools close to the residential houses. This is enshrined in the municipal legislation. The third block is about creating new jobs, diverse jobs for different technological intensity. The city cannot be only a place for spending leisure hours. This is about doing business. This is about well-being of people. This is about working. And we pay a lot of attention to creating cozy, comfortable, and convenient housing. We do a lot in order to improve the coziness, turning the city into the comfortable and convenient space, not just only the places of work, but we want people to enjoy staying in the cities. We improve the quality. We are setting up a state-of-the-art healthcare system, not only to combat the infectious diseases, but to improve the health of the cities. Another area of our work is about setting up sports facilities and the facilities for leisure hours. Moscow nowadays is one of the greenest cities in the world in terms of green plantation. According to many experts, we are almost #1 in the world among the megapolises of its side. More than 90% of the population have access to green territories, so to say, parks which are located in the walking distance from their houses. More than 60% of Moscow residents have in the proximity the items of culture and facilities to spend their leisure hours. There is a room for improvement for the development of the economy. It is about the transformation of a new territory which acceded to Moscow, which we call New Moscow, former Moscow region. We would like to build a well-balanced fabric of the city, where new jobs would be created, residential houses would be built, and high-tech industries would be located. So some growth points aimed at boosting the city's economy. About 60% of people who are living on the territory of the so-called New Moscow, they can work nearby. Over the last 7 years, thanks to the efforts of the Moscow administration, we see that more than 250,000 new jobs were created, and by 2025, the number of jobs would reach the figure of 1 million. This is a big gain for the city. The city is a megapolis. But creating 1 million new jobs is one of our most ambitious goals. Following the results of the work of the Moscow government, which resulted in acceding a new territory to Moscow, let me quote several figures. Since 2012, the Moscow territory increased 204 times. But the city doesn't live on its own. It is a part of a big agglomeration, including nearby administrative districts of Russia, other cities, smaller cities and towns. And therefore, the Moscow agglomeration population is about 20 million people. So these are the commuters who live and work in Moscow and the Moscow region. By 2030, the population will grow by 10–11%. This poses another challenge for us, but at the same time, it opens up lots of opportunities. The economy is on the rise, and it creates need for new jobs and labor force and human capital. This is a very positive trend for our city. In order to provide for the daily growth, to provide for the everyday economic functioning, Moscow administration, which is responsible for the urban development, has developed the main areas actually to fund capital construction. We have three main areas for funding: metro, or the Moscow Tube, as well as hubs, transportation hubs, also road construction, and Moscow renovation or gentrifying. I'd like to note that in the 80 years of Moscow Metro history, we built 178 stations and 200 kilometers of lines, and 156 new stations have been built over the last 10 years, and 150 kilometers of lines. That means that we increased the metro capacity almost 2 times, and 58 kilometers more of lines, and 25 new stations are going to be built in the upcoming years. Our biggest project is about building a new ring road, metro ring road, which will be commissioned by 2030. It will have 70 kilometers of lines, 31 stations, and it will engulf 34 central districts of the city, connecting the sectors of the city, especially the ones which are remote from the downtown, and therefore it would relieve the transportation system of the city of Moscow, and therefore the people could go to to their working places and to places where they spend their leisure hours, so without necessarily going to the downtown. And we are going to complete that project in a year or two. As for the road construction is concerned, Moscow is building it the following way. The main centers are administrative authority, and most of the jobs allocated in the downtown. And the radial move from the downtown to the outskirts and from suburbs to the center put a lot of load onto the transportation network. We invested and we constructed 1,000 kilometers of roads of radial nature, and we built a lot of hordes in order to connect different sectors of the city so that the people, the cargo, and the vehicle special services could move without going to the downtown, when actually they could use the shortcuts. It was a big program, and within 10 years, we increased the existing road network by 10%.
That's been a big program, and we're going on it. And we plan to construct more than 300 kilometers, a lot of bridges, tunnels, and pedestrian systems for the transport and for transportation of our inhabitants. A big amount of job will be in the renovation of the housing. In 15 years, we plan to move more than 15 million people. 1 million people will get new apartments. We also plan to break away more than 5,000 buildings. They require capital renovation, but the decision was taken to allocate this construction by the city budget to move people to the new apartments, and the remaining areas just used for the city needs. To speed up the improvement of the life, to improvement the economical life of the city, great jobs are done by the city to improve the healthcare system of Moscow. So we've constructed more than 94 healthcare facilities in 10 years. By that time, the system of medical institutions was good, but we've improved multifunctional centers, inpatient and outpatient departments. We also plan to construct 64 big hospitals and outpatient departments within 3 years. So this will be the facilities with the best, most advanced equipment. And everything will be in accordance with the highest standards. We invest a lot into the road construction and underground construction, and also to the sports and cultural facilities. As you know, the World Cup, the Football World Cup took part in Moscow, and for that a lot of new facilities were constructed. They will not only be used for sports events, but also by the Muscovites to promote healthy lifestyle. And these facilities really work, and we plan to construct about 30 of them more. So despite the fact that the year 2020 wasn't easy for the majority of them, for many people it was tragic. Many of us have losses, many people died, but life goes on. The plans were set last year, we fulfilled, and we hope and we're sure that the plans on infrastructure and sustainable, healthy development, comfortable development will go on. And we'll do our best for that, like we used to do all the previous years. Thank you so much for your attention, dear colleagues. Thank you so much. As a Muscovite, I really enjoy what is happening. I remember the Moscow of the end of 90s and beginning of the 2000 and what happened then and what we have now is a totally new city, and this is highlighted not only by the Muscovites and all the visitors. I would like to wish all the success to you and to your department, because we are all the beneficiaries. Yes, sometimes there are difficult moments during the construction and reconstruction, but in the long run, we have comfort. Everything, what you do is aimed at improvement. Thank you so much. We've did our best, and also now. My next question is a bit more global, and this is a question to Professor Glaser. Mr. Glaser, in many works, you saw potential for the economic development in the urban regions when there are a lot of people in the city and the population goes up. And you say that if we focus more on the young people, that could boost changes as the paradigm of the post-industrial revolution changes. But we're now today, we faced something unexpected, and the humanity wasn't ready for the pandemic. Yes, there were alarm signals 10 and 20 years ago, but what happened this year happened for the first time. And yes, there are a lot of people in the urban areas, and this high concentration of population turned from advantage into the disadvantage. Now, some people do not want to live in this high, dense paradigm. Do you think this paradigm will change? Will we turn back from hyper-urbanization to some other, to being less concentrated, or will we remain as concentrated as before? What do you think, Professor?
I think that humanity will remain committed to density. Cities have been powering creativity, opportunity, and the march of human connection for millennia. Unfortunately, there are also demons that come with density. Density brings with it traffic congestion, high housing prices, sometimes crime, and most terribly of all, contagious disease. If two people are close enough to communicate an idea face-to-face, they are also close enough to communicate a bacteria. But we have had a blessed century in which for 100 years, we have not been faced with a plague on the level of COVID-19. But we are in some sense back to the old normal, back to the age of the 19th century when cholera and yellow fever stalked our cities, or even earlier, to the age of just the Emperor Justinian, when the first appearance of Yersinia pestis on European shores ended that emperor's attempt to reimpose the Pax Romana on the Mediterranean world. But we must remember the lessons of the past. We must recognize that in order to survive this new era of pandemic, our cities must come back in a way that is both smarter and more equitable. I want to highlight with this graph 3 main points. This is a timeline of death rates in New York City over the past 200 years. A boy born in New York City in 1900 could expect to live 6 years less than a boy born in a farm during the same century. That was about the same life expectancy gap that existed between London and the rest of England during the time of Shakespeare. The second point is that New York, like all of the cities of the world, only became healthier by spending an enormous amount on health-related infrastructure. America's cities and towns were spending as much on clean water and sanitation at the start of the 20th century as our national government was spending on everything else except for the post office and the army. That is a suggestion of just how much we should be willing to spend to make sure that this pandemic is a once-off event, that it never happens again. The third point I want to make from this is that infrastructure is never enough. You also need institutions and you need incentives. So I was raised on a story of engineering triumphalism, that New York had been filthy, and then the good engineers built the aqueducts, built the water pipes, and then all of a sudden the city was healthy. Well, you can see on this graph that the aqueduct was built in 1842. Hopefully you can see Croton Aqueduct opened there. New York continues to have cholera pandemics for 25 years after that aqueduct was opened. And the reason for that is that you have the same last mile problem that you see in the poor world today, that poor people weren't willing to pay for the connections. They weren't willing to pay the cost of being connected with the aqueduct. And consequently, they continue to get cholera. They continue to die. It wasn't until 1866, and you can see here the Board of Health opening in 1866, that you start having rules that are imposed on tenement owners. The remarkable Dr. Stephen Smith starts having regulations that require the Board of Health to connect tenements with that water. And finally, you see cholera falling. Two other smaller points that come from this. One of which is that despite cholera, and cholera was a far deadlier disease than COVID-19, despite cholera, cities continued to grow during the 19th century. And I think that reminds us of how resilient our urban world ultimately is, of how much people actually want to be connected with each other. The last point is that both cholera and yellow fever came in from the global trading network, of which New York was already a hub in the first part of the 19th century. The connections that bind our world must not disappear, right? I am terribly, terribly sad that we are not in the same room with one another, that we cannot connect in person. But as long as those connections exist, we are at risk. And that is yet another reason why our world needs to make the investments that we need to do to make sure that this never happens again. Now, when we think about building back smarter, infrastructure is part of the story, but incentives and institutions are in other parts of that story. Singapore is the second densest country on the planet, and yet its streets move smoothly during prime hours because it has rules that charge people for the price of the congestion they impose. Because Singapore has had electronic road pricing for over 20 years and has had congestion pricing since 1975. Right? If you think you can just build your way out of traffic congestion, you are mistaken. There's something called the fundamental law of highway traffic, which is that vehicle miles traveled increase roughly 1-for-1 with highway miles built. This has been identified and established by Gilles Duranton and Matthew Turner. If you build it, you will just get more drivers. Only if you have pricing of roads, right, will you actually get people to use the roads in an appropriate fashion, where you get roads that are actually livable. In a world of climate change, it is even more important that we do not artificially subsidize people to drive, people to make trips. And consequently, using prices is absolutely vital. But we need to make sure that we have the right rules that make sure that you use the health infrastructure, rules that make sure that you don't overuse roads, but not roads that actually artificially stymie the creativity that we need. In the US, in much of Europe, this COVID pandemic is a small business Armageddon, right? 45% of the small businesses in the US were closed as of April 2020. And yet small businesses, entrepreneurship, are the lifeblood of urban reinvention. 50 years ago, the economist Benjamin Chinitz compared New York and Pittsburgh. And as you can see by the graph, by those two pictures, this is an image of New York and Pittsburgh's primary industries. New York was a city built on the garment industry, an industry with very few barriers to entry and few economies of scale, in which any smart individual with a good idea and a sewing machine could get started. And so it was a mother of entrepreneurship. People started in entrepreneurship and did hundreds of new things. They built skyscrapers, they started movie studios, they went on to change the world. Those entrepreneurs proved to be very resilient. And when New York faltered, the garment industry was clobbered in the 1960s, those entrepreneurs did remarkable things. As you can see on the other side of that image, Pittsburgh had a different industry. Because of its coal mines, it had US Steel, an industry that thrived on a large corporate structure, and it trained company men rather than entrepreneurs. And when US Steel faltered, right, those company men were unable to reinvent themselves for a new age. It is remarkable, given how weak our measures of entrepreneurship are, that they do such a powerful job of predicting urban success. And you can see that in the graph that I'm showing you right now, that there's a very strong relationship between average firm size and subsequent employment growth. And as you can see, the bar marked 1 shows those metropolitan areas with the smallest average establishment sizes. The bar marked 5 shows those establishments with the largest establishment sizes. And you can see the very large gap in employment growth that's associated with the small firms. Often the smartest economic development strategy at the local level is to attract and train smart people and then get out of their way. And indeed, as we look forward, we really need to make sure that we make entrepreneurship, particularly the entrepreneurs who employ the least educated people, do not face artificial barriers. One particular challenge in entrepreneurship is the entrepreneurship of women. And what you can see across the world from the World Bank Enterprise Survey is the share of entrepreneurs who are women in different countries. There is a big gap here between Afghanistan, which is the lowest of these, and Romania, which is the highest, more than 50% in Romania. Female entrepreneurs need 2 things to survive, to thrive. What they don't need are good ideas and energy. They have plenty of that. They have plenty of brilliance. But they do need rule of law and gender norms that are actually accepting for women to be successful. And this just shows you across the world the relationship between one of the measures of traditional gender norms, restricted physical integrity, and the share of businesses that are owned by women. So, but you need both. You need both rules to protect women from exploitation, from expropriation, and evolution towards a world in which anyone, be they male or female, black or white, can get started with a new business. And the most important thing that city governments can do is to make sure that they have an easy regulatory environment, that the people who actually create the economic future for the city, the small businesses, actually are able to move forward. 2 last points, one of which is cities have always been forges of human capital, places where people get smart by being around other smart people. And you can see there on the left the relationship between population density and per capita productivity across America's metropolitan areas. Very strong positive relationship. But too often, they're not places in which cities fuel opportunity. What you can see here is the measure of upward mobility in cities on the right-hand side, and that one's actually going down. Plato, 2,400 years ago, writing in one of the greatest of all urban environments, wrote that every city of whatever size is in reality 2 cities, one a city of the rich and the other of the city of the poor, and they are perpetually at war with each other. Cities should never apologize for their inequality. They are fundamentally unequal places because they attract the rich and they attract the poor. They attract the poor with public transportation, with the ability to get around without a car, with better social services, and with economic opportunity. But cities can only tolerate their inequality if they are always being escalators, always being places in which they are enabling the poor to become rich, right? And when they fail in that, as too often they are doing in the 21st century, then they are failing in their historic mission, and then their inequality is turned into a curse rather than a blessing. And indeed, in this case, education is the vital key, and leveraging the resources of the city, the ability to tolerate competition, entrepreneurship, and new innovation are absolutely crucial. Last point I want to make. Cities are partially so vital because they are one of our best weapons against global warming. It is a great irony that the spaces that look brown are green and the spaces that look green are brown. This shows a map of carbon emissions throughout the Boston metropolitan area. The dense inner core is green. The outer areas, which are in fact very leafy, are brown. And the reason is the people who live in those leafy areas, they drive longer distances, they live in larger houses, and they consume more carbon, right? They emit more carbon into the atmosphere. The people who live in smaller urban apartments, the Muscovites, the residents of London, the residents of Kolkata, these are the people who drive shorter distances or walk and live in smaller apartments, and they commit less carbon. One way of seeing this is if the great urban economies of India and China see their carbon emissions rise to the level seen in the sprawling United States, global carbon emissions go up by 125%. If those carbon emissions stop at the level seen in wealthy but hyperdense Hong Kong, global carbon emissions go up by less than 25%, right? We have a lot to gain from urbanizing our world, and we will urbanize our world, and we will continue to urbanize our world, despite the threat of COVID-19, despite the pandemics that occasionally connect with cities, right? Because in fact, we are an urban species, and we are at our best when we learn from one another, when we work from one another, and when we are able to do that, we have worked miracles from that age of Socrates and Plato 2,400 years ago up until the present, where the age of urban miracles is not done, and the best years of cities are still ahead of us. Thank you.
Professor Glazer, спасибо большое за очень интересный доклад.
Professor Glazer, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation. I have a couple of minutes. I would like to ask a quick question. Really, I agree with you in essence. I do believe that urbanization will stay with us and that the density in the cities will rise for social and psychological reasons, which we have mentioned. I'm working for Skolkovo Fund, which supports development of technologies. And in that part, I have certain questions related to the fact that the technologies which are being developed and implemented and deployed, they are connected to the changes to infrastructure, which you mentioned as one of the factors behind urbanization. And we also have extra incentives created by the cities. Thanks to the technologies, these incentives, advantages of living in the cities also change. For instance, education, which you mentioned at the end of your presentation, becomes more remote. People can get knowledge without necessarily living in cities. Distance learning, I mean. So will the technologies decrease the requirements to incentives and to technologies in the cities, and people will just comfortably live outside the cities, or the technologies will not change anything?
That is a question that I have been grappling with for the last 30 years of my life. The first person who claimed that new technologies would lead to an end of face-to-face contact and the cities that enable that contact was Alvin Toffler, writing in The Third Wave. I thought he was wrong then. I still think, even in an era of Zoom, that this is wrong now. For most of the past 30 years, cities have enjoyed a remarkable resurgence, despite the fact that it seemed like the rise of personal computers and the internet and fax machines should cause us to decentralize. And I think the reason for that is what globalization and new technologies did is they rapidly increased the returns to being smart. And we are a social species that gets smart by being around other smart people, right? Anyone who's ever taught knows the hard part about teaching is not speaking your words or knowing your subject material, but grasping whether or not anything you are saying is getting through to your students, right? That is vastly harder to do when you're not in the same room with one another. I know how to say the words of economics. I do not know how to inspire 19-year-olds to think that mathematical economics is a good thing to do for their lives unless I am in the same room with one another. And I think that struggle is being faced by companies and by teachers throughout the world. That in fact, connecting in cyberspace will never compare to sharing a meal or a kiss or a smile. That there's just no possible difference. There's no possible way to do this just remotely. It is true, assuredly, that many people will in fact continue to switch to being remote. From our own survey work, 40% of the companies that we polled said that 40% or more of their workers who switched will stay switched. But people who are not hiring new workers for remote jobs, and the remote working phenomenon is overwhelmingly a phenomenon just for the most educated. 70% of people with advanced degrees in the United States in May were remote working. Only 5% of high school dropouts were remote working. And for that reason, I think we just cannot tolerate a world in which we have given up on face-to-face connection. And I think the last reason, which is probably the most important, is just even if it can be almost as productive as being there, it's just not fun. It's just not joyful in the same way, right? And the whole trend in work over the past 40 years, especially for young knowledge workers, was to create work environments which were fun, which were exciting, which were seedbeds of innovation by connecting smart people and enable them to riff off one another. After all, you think that if all the companies in the world could have managed remote working prior to COVID, it would have been Google. But that was the last thing Google did. They bought the Googleplex. They bought 1.5 million square feet in downtown Manhattan. They insisted that their workers be right on top of each other, partially because they thought it would make them more creative, but partially also because that was what the workers want. And we have seen every time the COVID-19 regulations are eased, young people have rushed back into the city, have rushed back out again, have clamored to be next to one another. And I think for that reason, you really should never count cities out.
Спасибо большое, профессор. Я также разделяю вашу страсть к большим...
Thank you so much, Professor. I share your love for big cities. I'm not a rural resident, and I hope that we will never kiss each other through internet, and we'll do that when we see each other personally. Actually, we have discussed how Moscow reacts to the new challenges. And we talked to futurists how the big cities will feel and develop, whether the pandemic would affect that or not. But still, in terms of the fundamental requirements, in terms of the fundamental needs for people in a big city, in a small city, and outside the city, we bet on health. And my next question would go to Vice President of Novo Nordisk, Mr. Niels Lund. We wanted to discuss the program, Cities Changing Diabetes program, improving the patients with diabetes lives. Mr. Lund, I know that such a challenge, which you have addressed, is really very difficult. I'm a doctor. In terms of my background, I know what a metabolic disorder is about, and I know how the lifestyle may affect the number of people, patients, and the gravity of the disease, the approaches which your company uses. I know that you are building a community of people. You're working with the NGOs, civil society, civil society organizations. But how does your work affect the urban planning or urban development?
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for inviting me back to Moscow. I attended the Moscow Urban Forum in 2019, and I thought it was a really great opportunity. I come from a healthcare company, and for almost 100 years we've been focused very much on the biomedical domain of disease. But I think it has become clear and clear over the past couple of decades, and certainly in the last decade, that if patients don't use the medicine, it doesn't work. And why is that? And what impedes the use of medicines in that regard? I would claim that diabetes is one of the greatest healthcare threats, and then you would say, what planet are you living on? And of course, COVID-19 is the imminent healthcare threat of the moment. But if COVID-19 is a pandemic in fast motion, then I think diabetes is a pandemic in slow motion. And it is continuing an upward trend. In the last couple of decades, we have seen a doubling of the prevalence of diabetes, and it's continuing to grow, which with great negative impact for individuals, but also for economies. And that is why we analyzed this and said, where's the intersection of this challenge? It is between health and urbanization, because more and more people are living in cities, slightly more than half the world's population, but already now 2 out of 3 people living with diabetes live in cities. And it's not because cities are magnets for people with diabetes and then they move there. It's because the way we live, the way we eat, the way we transport ourselves, the way that we live in the world. I think there are important learnings from COVID-19 in the sense that it helps us understand the importance of both treatment and prevention. And I would say that COVID-19, diabetes and obesity is a really, really bad cocktail. We see that very, very clearly, and there's probably something with biology here that the inflammation caused by diabetes and obesity, also has a negative effect on the prospect for COVID-19. But it is just as much the social and cultural factors that are at play here. And it's if you're not in secure housing, if you don't have access to healthcare services, if you are out of a job, then your risk of bad outcomes from COVID-19 are high, just as they are for diabetes and obesity. And we see that actually across the world with increasing rates of both morbidity and mortality in that cross section between diabetes and obesity. And that's therefore we need to address the disease from a biomedical point of view, but also to look at both infectious as well as chronic diseases from from both a social and cultural determinant point of view. I think that's, if we don't do that, we're missing the point, and we won't be able to address those challenges. We looked at Moscow, in addition to the 36 other cities that are part of this public-private partnership called Cities Change Diabetes, where we tried to, through an anthropological listening approach, studied what is the conversation about diabetes for Muscovites. And I think it's interesting to see something that is particular for Moscow, but also something that is generalizable. First of all, that men in Moscow are less likely to be diagnosed with diabetes. One thing is particular to Moscow is that they don't get diabetes as often as in other parts of the world. The prevalence is quite low, but that's because the life expectancy of Muscovites is almost 10 years younger than women. But what is common around the world is that men don't go to the doctor, and they're not likely to talk about their diabetes. There's a stigma around this that's both for men and women, but it's probably more for men. For women, they're more willing to talk about the diabetes, but they are also to some extent stigmatized with diabetes, both in the workplace and in society. And then they face this double challenge of both living with the disease themselves, but also being a caregiver in the family. And I think these are, understanding these factors and how stigma, maybe also you can say the mistrust in public institutions, maybe a belief that is a couple of decades old but still persists, and other factors that drive mistrust and social isolation. We need to address those factors in addition to having set up the best possible healthcare systems to address disease. And I think that's goes for Moscow as well as for other places. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, господин Лунд.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lund.
Мне бы хотелось, чтобы ваша программа двигалась вперед.
I'd like your program to move forward, so that more and more patients or people who run the risk of diabetes are included into your program, and therefore, together with the Moscow government, together with the city authorities, we could address this problem. My next question goes to Kristen Knudsen, Director of External Relations Strategy, Knowledge and Innovation, UN Habitat. Ms. Knudsen, are you with us? Can you hear us? Are you connected? Are you tuned?
I'm with you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much.
Знаем, что в 2016
We know that in 2016, at a UN conference, a program was adopted which is called a new program for city development, which in essence laid the foundation of what we may call sustainable development of cities. 4 years later, in 2020, we can look back the measures which were incorporated into that program. Which of them are most popular? Which of them were had most success, and what has to be changed? And such a sudden factor as the pandemic probably also would reshape the program in the next years. So what we succeeded in, and what do we have to change due to the new factors which emerged? I mean, this black swan, COVID-19.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Honorable Deputy Mayor, Dr. Glazer, Dr. Lund, thank you so much to invite me to join this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to be with you. And as have already been said, I would wish very much that we were in your beautiful city of Moscow. It's been many years since I have returned, but hopefully we'll be able to meet again there soon in person. And I really did want to take just a moment to thank and warmly congratulate the Moscow Urban Forum as this unique and dynamic platform. UN Habitat very much appreciates our long-standing partnership with you, and thank you for organizing today's important conference and this very dynamic panel that I've joined now. As you know, sustainable urban development is at the very core of our mandate at UN Habitat, and we are also, as you have noted, the UN agency mandated to coordinate the follow-up and the review of progress on the implementation of the new urban agenda. Why is this important? I would argue, as many of our other speakers have said, it is now more important than ever. With 55% of the world's population now living in urban areas and some expectations that that will rise to 70% living in cities by 2050, we see cities as the vehicle to address global environmental, social, economic, and health issues with people where they live. And less than 3 months ago, we celebrated the 75th General Assembly of the United Nations. The key findings there identified that local action and local and regional governments are in the spotlight for the future of humanity. So bringing together local action, local government, and ensuring the urban agenda ahead of us, I think this is a very timely discussion for us to have today. As Madam Maud Sharif, our executive director, noted earlier in her remarks, the battle to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, all of the SDGs, will be won or lost in cities. And the ways that cities respond to these needs, arising from an increasing concentration of population, can lead to vastly different outcomes. These cities can exacerbate challenges to sustainable development, including inequalities, social and economic exclusion, and environmental degradation, or they can generate economic growth, social and cultural development, and strengthen the efficient use of natural resources. UN Habitat recognizes and commends the many metropolitan areas that are championing the localization of these sustainable development goals. And to complement that national review process, we are seeing more and more cities who are entrepreneurial and innovative and taking on those SDGs, applying them in local contexts. This is primarily through the use of an instrument called the Voluntary Local Review, the VLR. And I just wanted to spend a moment on that because the local reviews are not only a mechanism to report and monitor progress against the SDGs, but they complement the voluntary national reviews and are an excellent mechanism to mobilize citizens and broader stakeholder base towards the achievement of these global goals locally. Major metropolises like Moscow, like New York, Tokyo, Bogota, Sao Paulo are embracing the 2030 agenda and localizing them into their city development strategies in many different ways. And that innovation, I think, is something we must embrace and share. We're also discovering that in many cities, the leadership, the mayors, the senior officials, and the technical cadres are not yet sufficiently familiar with these commitments that their national governments have made to the global agenda. And for this reason, UN Habitat is engaging actively in more than 90 countries and in many fora, just as this today, to work globally to continue to sensitize, disseminate, develop capacities to implement the framework of the new urban agenda and achieve the SDGs. And I'd like to pause here just to highlight some tools which could be useful in this regard, including the Urban Agenda Platform, which is a broad stakeholder space for national reports, civil society reports, core commitments coming out of the World Urban Forum, where we have more transparency, engagement, and sharing of that vision together. We have a new online course on the new urban agenda, a new illustrated handbook, which allows a much easier access to that information and understanding in many languages. So all of these are, of course, available on our website and will be available through the Moscow Urban Forum as well. It provides a stronger practical understanding because if we stay in theory, if we stay in ideas only, we know that we will struggle. The practical and the pragmatic is where all of you excel and where we must continue to make progress, as was noted by the deputy mayor earlier. And we have a series of these successful city cases where we have a best practice repository to inspire and to learn across the board. We need to keep producing that kind of knowledge material, that kind of normative guidance, so that cities and local government in all phases of the localization have a chance to share, grow, and innovate and create together. As we consider at UN Habitat, really the solutions start with cities in making this progress globally. Now, looking ahead, we now only have 10 years away from the critical 2030 agenda threshold and the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think we all know and have been well documented and shared. This has considerably slowed our collective global progress. Now, the pandemic has revealed underlying challenges to achieving the priorities spelled out in the SDGs and the new urban agenda. It has also clearly shown that the goals and principles remain valid and robust enough, perhaps more than ever, in the context of the pandemic. The critical areas for collective recovery are also highlighted in a document that the UN Secretary General has produced, a policy paper on COVID-19 in an urban world, and I commend that document for your consideration. Habitat was the primary facilitator of this process, working with many agencies and, importantly, bringing local authorities themselves into the policy debates. This brief highlights inequalities which are deeply rooted in our societies and discusses how cities may tackle and manage the pandemic and its deep consequences going forward. And it also shares a vision, a quite realistic vision, I would argue, of cities which can and will emerge from this pandemic as vital hubs of creativity, resilience, and innovation. As Dr. Glaser had said, I think much more eloquently, the best years of the city, the brighter future of cities lies ahead of us, and we must rise to that challenge and tackle that together. The SG's, the Secretary General's policy brief, calls for conscious policy choices and priority actions across the board, but with particular respect to three areas. First, tackling inequalities and development deficits to reduce urban vulnerabilities and strengthen human rights and the respect of the rights of all. Second, strengthening the capacities of local governments, human, technical, financial, and enhancing multi-level coordination. And third, pursuing a resilient, inclusive, gender equal, and green economic recovery. As has been mentioned, the gender dimension of this recovery cannot be underestimated across all of these areas of our attention. Key priorities consist of improved access to basic services such as healthcare, education, and providing increased support to those places hit the hardest by the pandemic, including boosting economic recovery and employment while remaining the focus on fighting climate change. All of these priorities fall into the mandate and work of local and regional government, which have not only proved essential in fighting the immediate consequences of the crisis, but are key to ensuring sustainable and inclusive recovery for all. Progress in sustainable urbanization will be reviewed through key milestones in the next 2 years, and it will be, I think, a very interesting and insightful exercise to engage in a whole of society approach. All governments are invited to prepare their national reports on the progress in implementing the new urban agenda. These will be coming forth due in the first quarter next year. And this will give us critical insights into the overall progress and the challenges encountered so far in the sustainable development of cities and the quality of life for all in urban areas. In 2022, the Secretary General's quadrennial report on the new urban agenda will also be presented, informed by these reports and other contributions. It's through follow-up, review of progress on the SDGs and the new urban agenda that we can see where, in exact terms, more effort is needed to achieve the sustainable and inclusive greener cities that we all want. This also provides us with an evidence of success to allow us to celebrate and inspire action. Thank you very much. Спасибо большое, and very much looking forward to the continuing debate and conversation. Thank you.
Большое спасибо, госпожа Кнутсон. Гигантское спасибо.
Thank you very much. A giant thank for your great presentation, Ms. Knudsen. It will be especially important for us at the beginning of the next year, the first quarter, to see and to assess the changes concerning the program for sustainable development. My next question is to my colleague of the innovative branch, Evgeny Kuznetsov. He's not a venture capital specialist. He's a futurist. He always looks at the future from top down, and he's trying to assess the global trends. He has personal interest for that and also to make the investment successful. So what do you think about the change of the transport infrastructure of the big cities? We know a lot of jokes about the first transport revolution. When was it? And people said that it happened when the cars emerged. And when the cars emerged, at the end of the 19th century, people said that it would be impossible for cars to move faster than 30 kilometers per hour because it will be impossible for people to breathe. But today we can see drones, we can see different new cars. So what will happen? What will change? Thank you for your question, because dwelling on it is the dwelling of what has been discussed today. Clearly, cities become more and more efficient when the maximum amount of people start collaborating, when there are opportunities for different entrepreneurs in different spheres, when the cities are built not around the monotype business, but when there are a lot of businesses, services, and this requires environment, space. We have Geiger agglomerations as in China, where Hong Kong, Macau, and this is a giant agglomeration of megacities. And using the transport we have today, it is impossible to do this system enough for this kind of spaces. Even in Moscow, the way from one place to another can take as long as 2 hours. But bigger cities, more people, and people want more comfort. So step by step, we have to use the air for our logistics so that we can not only go by car, by bus, or by air. Helicopter has launched their start in Singapore. Johan starts the same flights in Guangzhou, in China, and they start to use drones for logistics supply also, and for the delivery. Yes, this is a revolution. I hope this will be step by step. So for several years, these will be pilot experiments and tests. Everyone will look how it works, but as soon as everyone assesses the perspectives, the industry will increase. And especially it will happen when there will be a system to regulate this. So I think that in 10 years, moving by air will be important component of all the transportation system. But what is the target? To make the person more involved in the environment they're used to. Yes, we all remember and we all know how cars appeared. Yes, they save a lot of time, but they take more time from us in even health. But if the city becomes more formal, with a lot of formats, you have more opportunities to walk and to create this space better, so that thanks to different transport means like a flying taxi, to go somewhere rapidly and to walk there. The air transport will quite logically be not concentrated everywhere, but around the transportation hubs. In other words, the city becomes more formatic, allowing people to be more active physically and mentally, and to be more free to choose the opportunities to go, to move, will no longer be cut off from services or cultural facilities. These people who spend in the suburbs and who live in the suburbs now have to spend several hours to get to the center of the city for some entertainment. These new transportation means will increase the quality of life and open new opportunities for people to work and to do better and to be healthier. And it takes the burden from the current infrastructure clearly, because there are a lot of cars, a lot of public transport means, and they are filled. There are a lot of people. There are also couriers and delivery systems with the boxes, and all this is on the same road. So I don't think that the passengers will go off-road first, but the smaller cargoes. Yes, Yandex has launched the delivery using the drones. They go to the center of Moscow, Belaruski Square. They also go to Skolkovo, so the process has started. But people do not understand what happens.
So this is a kind of a tractor which is at very little speed, is moving posts and mail and parcels. So we're looking forward to many more such innovations. So I do think that it would develop very rapidly, because the cities need very much to take the load of the transportation network and the transportation network systems. Thank you so much, Evgeny, and have a very good opportunity to bridge it with the presentation by Tigran Khudoverdian, the managing director of Yandex. That's great that Yandex emerged in our conversation on its own. It was not planned for, but probably you heard what Mr. Glazer has said. He said that the main magnet for the main interaction for the big consideration of the people in the cities, this is either the benefits related to the benefits and incentives which can gain only in the cities. The technologies obviously have to somehow accentuate these bonuses and these incentives. Does Yandex somehow improve the benefits of living in the city? Good afternoon, or even good evening. So what we are observing all over the world, COVID-19 made a real revolution everywhere related to the goods delivery. And actually, lots of revolutions took place, and I would like to highlight almost all of them, or at least several of them. Russia is among the countries where commerce and trade was not very well developed, and now we see the rise in the online shopping. The mentality of people changed. How does it impact us and our cities? So it means that the couriers phenomena has accelerated. We see a lot of couriers, branded ones and non-branded ones, who are delivering lots of goods. And there are scooters, minivans with no logos, with no brands, which are delivering goods all over the city. But actually, it increases the load on the transportation network, transportation center, and this is the last mile and all the areas. And this is a new challenge for the mankind. In essence, it turns out that if we imagine that half of the goods would be shopped online, in Russia, online shopping actually accounts only for 5% of all the goods purchased. So you can imagine how many couriers we'll see in the streets, how many scooters and vehicles delivering goods we'll see in the roads. And this is a problem which we have to address before the rovers and drones are not so popular. Obviously, the impact of the online trade, e-commerce would impact urban planning, urban construction. We will have to reshape the spaces, the buildings, and realizing that this is not just a purely Russian national problem, this is a global problem, and we invest heavily into the unmanned vehicles or rovers in order to address the problem of shortage of couriers in the future. Making a rover which would mount, go up the ladder, for instance, and would push the button and hand over a parcel is hardly imaginable. But at the moment, still there are routes where rovers can be used in order to deliver a parcel or a product to some pickup point. This is very much related to what is going into the cities. Lockdown amid COVID-19 and technologies would be very handy. Another story is related to logistics. If you talk to the people who are employed in letting office spaces, they would tell you that there will be no business in the years to come, because we see the change in the mentality of the businessmen, of the directors. It turns out that actually you can work remotely. Working from home becomes a phenomenon, and many companies fully or partially give up their office spaces. I'm not sure how the situation would unfold in the future, but dozens of percentage points of people who now are sitting in front of the computers in the offices probably would do the same, but sitting at home. And it would change the life in the city. It means that you no longer have to go from one part of the city to another part of the city to work, and it means that people will have more free time, and they will spend more time in the areas where they live, and this is a change which we are looking forward to. And it will change the mental health of these people, psychological conditions of these people. We notice it that first it was real fun to work from home, but being locked down at home creates new challenges and problems for people never heard of before. And we see the rise in the number of people turning to psychologists, being locked down, staying at home without communicating to people physically, without actually taking metro to go somewhere. This is a real challenge for them. This is a stress for them. What we are anticipating in future, these are the issues which we have to address now. There are lots of theories how actually the urban area is going to be arranged, and probably the working hours would be more flexible, or I think that, on the contrary, people would work from home and no longer have to go to work somewhere. This is my viewpoint, and certainly I do think that these changes would have a positive impact on the people. Everything would be delivered online, and you will work from home. These are the two main changes which I anticipate in 2020, 2021. Tigran, actually, I'm a subscriber to Yandex Plus, and I decided to become a subscriber because I'm using your Kinopoisk, or just like Netflix, Russian Netflix. And do you think that entertainment would be done online as well, or as social animals, we still are going to go to the theaters or to circus? I think that we'll be surrounded by TV, nothing else. Nothing else. Well, I think that online channel is something which we are having incrementally. This is a new addition. Online theaters, online cinemas, online entertainment. Before, it was at the disposition of just tiny share of the people, and most of the people just played computer games. But now it has become a major part of our life, just like TV has not forced all kinds of entertainment out. I think that online will become just a part of the world of entertainment. I don't have any doomsday ideas about the life which we used to have before. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. It was a very interesting session. We don't have much time for Q&A, and I have a last question for all the speakers, and try to be as brief as possible. Today we have discussed that technological approaches highlighted by Evgeny, by Tigran, the approaches to the urban planning and urban management based on urban health, sustainable development, and taking care of the well-being of the people, at the end of the day, should result in making people happier. And I have a very brief question to everyone, and be as brief as possible. Just 3 words, if you may. In your opinion, what happiness is about? How can you increase the happiness rate? Professor Glazer, over to you.
Happiness is one's own freedom and the ability and the opportunity to empower everyone else around you.
Очень четко и кратко.
Very concise, very brief. Thank you so much. Evgeny, over to you. As far as actually you were almost the last speaker, what do you think? Happiness is a very comprehensive parameter, multifaceted parameter. In order to make a person happy, he has to be healthy. He has to clearly understand how his life evolves. And he has to find himself in a very comfortable and convenient environment. Where we're moving to in terms of the urban development, the modern concepts, so they are aimed at making a person more sustainable, happier and healthier, because this person is more productive and he or she helps other people to live more productively. Therefore, there are various technologies, transportation, healthcare, digital technologies. They all create a platform for a new breakthrough towards happiness. We have resolved the problem of famine, hunger, longevity, and now we have to address the problems of how to make life happier and more conscious. This is a Maslow pyramid. Ms. Knudsen, what do you think about happiness? Happiness of urban residents. What happiness is about?
Oh, tough questions to finish our day. So we know that urban design and city structure affect the well-being and happiness of people who live in them. And if we accept that, I'll give you 4 ideas. Integrate health into urban planning. Make sure that we're looking at density and planning it well, not overcrowding. Consider 15-minute neighborhoods where you have a compact and designed mixed-use space within 15 minutes of walking and easy access. And sustainable mobility options. Expand them, make them affordable and inclusive.
Спасибо большое. Тоже очень интересно.
Thank you so much. Also very interesting and very specific. Mr. Lund, how...
If it's just one sentence, then it's the ability to live life to the maximum of your ability, and making sure that the opportunities to realize those abilities are there, and that is not just the responsibility of the individual. It takes the whole of society.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Tigran?
Я постараюсь коротко. I
will try to be very brief. I will speak not as a professional. Just happiness is about having free time. And the cities should give a lot of free time to the residents to take care of themselves, to do something interesting, to spend less time in public transport or traveling, waste little time onto purchasing something, having free time. Actually, I will agree with you. The modern urban residents do not have much of free time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for interesting contribution, interesting answers to the last final question, which turned out to be quite sudden. for our speakers, and answers were very straightforward. Thank you so much. We discussed the questions related to how mega policies react to the global challenges, including the pandemic, and how actually the cities are changing the paradigm of development. Hopefully to see you physically next year. Thank you so much.